of South Carolina.
I ask the quorum qual be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in opposition to the Chinese tariff bill being proposed by my colleague from New York. I understand the frustration that motivates this legislation, and I share serious concerns over China's currency manipulation and trade practices. I've worked for years to ensure that free trade happens on a level playing field, and we still have a long way to go. But the answer to these frustrations with China is not to start a trade war that will raise prices on many goods for American families at a time when they're already struggling, especially when this approach has already been tried and failed to gain any positive results for American workers. The absolute last thing our floundering economy needs right now are retaliatory tariffs on American products that will destroy more jobs. If we want to strengthen our currency, we should start by getting control of our own monetary policy in this country. We don't need to start a trade war with China. We need to stop the class warfare that's preventing jobs from being created right here in America. American workers are the best in the world, but they cannot fairly compete in a global economy when the U.S. government is keeping one arm tied behind their back. The solution is to free American workers, not to try to tie up our competitors with more misguided policies that will hurt American families with higher prices on household goods. The United States government needs to give American workers the freedom to work, and that freedom starts with the freedom to get a job. And if President Obama and the Democrats want to know who is preventing jobs from being created in America, all they have to do is to look in the mirror. Let's be clear about a few things. Other countries aren't threatening to massively raise taxes on our nation's job creators and drive jobs overseas. President Obama is. Other countries didn't jam through a health care takeover bill that's raising the cost of health care, making it harder for businesses to hire people, and adding trillions of dollars to our national debt. The Democrats in Congress did. Other countries didn't force us to pass the Dodd-Frank financial takeover with thousands of new regulations that are raising costs on American consumers and crippling businesses. Democrats in Congress did. Other countries aren't writing hundreds of new regulatory rules that are destroying jobs in our nation's energy sector and keeping us dependent on foreign oil. The administration's EPA is. Other countries aren't blocking Boeing from creating thousands of American jobs in the state of South Carolina. The President's National Labor Relations Board is. Other countries aren't forcing 28 U.S. states to require employees to join labor unions that make businesses less competitive. Democrats are the one protecting labor bosses and hurting workers in America. The Wall Street Journal has called this Chinese tariffs bill the most dangerous trade legislation in many years, and for good reason. If we pass this bill, it's likely to spark a trade war. It is unlikely to create new jobs in America, but will result in higher prices for U.S. consumers. And businesses will pay more for raw materials from China, which will increase prices on their goods and reduce employment. President Obama and the Democrats should know better after seeing the results of the tariff that was put on Chinese tires in 2009. In response, China retaliated with tariffs on American auto parts and poultry. This well-intended bill will have the same unintended results. I understand the economic frustrations that people have with China. But just as so many of Obama's other policies have done, this bill will only make things worse. This bill doesn't export the best of what American workers have to offer. It exports bad economics. Taxes and tariffs do not create jobs. Competition in markets do. Freedom will work if we let it. I urge the Senate to reject this bill and start helping American workers compete more freely here in America and around the world, instead of simply trying to hold others back. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Just a couple of comments on the comments from the senator from South Carolina. He was the ranking member on the Economic Policy Subcommittee, on which sat the presiding officer from Oregon also in 2009 and 10. And we held a series of hearings on manufacturing policy. And there was some agreement between Senator Dumen and me on having a manufacturing strategy. We're really the only major industrial country in the world without a real strategy on how to do manufacturing. There are three ways to create wealth in a society: manufacturing, and mining and agriculture. And manufacturing has been a dominant force and a significant creator of the middle class in this country, and I think we agree on that. And we agree that we want more of it in our country. 30 years ago, more than 25% of the gross domestic product of our country was manufacturing. Today, that number is less than half that. And there are countries around the world, Germany, for instance, which has had a manufacturing strategy, and they have almost twice the GDP. Manufacturing is almost twice the GDP and twice the workforce in their country. So while Senator Dumen and I disagree on this China trade bill, I do agree with the other Republican senator from South Carolina, Senator Graham, who has been a significant leader. He and Senator Schumer have worked on this for I believe more than half a decade, on responding to the cheating that the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China have done in this world, in the world trade structure. And I don't believe in any way that we're starting a trade war. The Chinese have, by almost any economist will tell you, the Chinese have been committing a trade war for a decade. That's why our trade deficit with China is 3 times what it was 10 or 11 years ago. It's why so many manufacturing jobs in Senator Graham's state, Senator Dumen's state of South Carolina, the presiding officer's state of Oregon, and my state of Ohio, so many manufacturing jobs have been lost, not only because of China currency, but that's clearly a significant contributing factor to that. And I go back to the illustration of if you had gas stations, one across the street from the other, in Akron, Ohio, if one gas station could buy its oil, its gasoline with a 25% discount, they'd soon put the other gas station out of business. And that's really what's happened with China, that China understands that they have a 25% advantage given to them because they game the currency system. And I know what that means. That the new presiding officer from North Carolina has seen that, what's happened to manufacturing in her state, a major a major manufacturing state in this country. And what's happened when one country, and we're not really our trade problems aren't with so much companies in China, they're with the government. I mean, it really is our companies against their government. And when they can game the system at a 25% bonus, and when they sell into the United States, they get a 25% bonus. When we try to sell into China, we get a 25% penalty on our companies and our products. And that hardly seems fair to me. So this is really, as Senator Graham has said so well, and Senator Schumer from New York, the two leaders in this for many years here, have said they just want to level the playing field. They don't want one country. They don't want us to have an advantage over China. Let us play it fair. Let us play it straight. Really is. That's what the question is. That's what this currency bill will ultimately do. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Madam President.
The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam President. I was wondering if my colleague from Ohio would consider a bit of a discussion for a few minutes. I found it very interesting in listening to some of the debate today that there seem to be some policymakers in the U.S. Senate who haven't come to understand that when another nation pegs its currency rather than letting it float, it does so deliberately to put in effect what is essentially a tariff against imports. And in our case, that's a tariff against American imports, and simultaneously provides a subsidy to exports. Now, here we are in America. Why would we say it's okay for China to peg its currency in a fashion that puts a tariff against American products and subsidizes Chinese exports to America? Because that's guaranteed to strip jobs out of America. Why would some members of this chamber consider that to be just fine? I'm puzzled by that, and I was wondering if you could help me understand that.
And I was listening to one of the previous speakers who opposed this bill characterize the bill as a China tariff bill. And you said it exactly right. When we sell to China, it's if they put a tariff on our products. When we buy from them, we give them a 25% bonus. When we try to sell to them, they have that import. When we buy from them, they have a 25% bonus, and it's putting us at such a disadvantage, as you say.
Well, in Oregon, we recently had the shutdown of a company called Blue Heron. It's operated for the better part of a century, making paper. And the point that Blue Heron was making was that because of the pegging of the currency, their paper, if they tried to sell it to China, faced a 25% tariff, while China's paper was 25% subsidy if it was sold into the U.S. And that it created an absolutely unfair international trade playing field that was going to be putting American paper makers out of business. No matter how efficient they could possibly be, China, with this subsidy, could sell into the U.S. market, undercutting American products. Well, that plant shut down, and it's one of a series of paper plants that has shut down, and I think you have some similar situations in Ohio.
The senator from Oregon and I have talked about this, that there was a gentleman who worked for a paper company that illustrated to me what China's done in a specific kind of paper called, it's kind of the glossy magazine paper, coated paper that the Chinese bought their wood pulp in Brazil. They shipped it to China. They milled it in China. They sold it back into the United States, and they undercut Blue Heron and undercut Ohio paper companies because they had that, as you say, that 25% subsidy. There's no way when labor costs are only about 10%, labor is only about 10% the cost of paper production, that you possibly could buy something as heavy and voluminous as wood pulp, as pulp, ship it across the ocean, mill it, ship it in the form of paper back, and the only way you could undercut prices is by huge subsidies. And that it may have been other subsidies too. It may have been water and energy and capital and land, but it surely was that 25% subsidy that these companies have when they undercut our manufacturers. And I just know in 15 years, Senator Merkley, or 10 years, we'll just look back on our country and our history and say, why did we let one country undercut our manufacturing base so substantially and lose all those jobs and lose all that technology. When the products are invented in this country, then the production is done offshore. So much of the innovation that's done on the shop floor ends up in that country rather than here, and it makes it harder for us when we lose that innovation edge to catch up.
Well, I think it's important to understand as well that the peg currency isn't the only tool that China is using to create an unlevel playing field against American products. Another is that they use something that economists call financial repression. Now, that's a fancy word for artificially lowering the interest rates on savings to a level below inflation. So if you're a Chinese citizen and you're saving money and the inflation rate is 5%, the interest rate you're going to get is going to be less than 5%. And it's a way, essentially, of taxing the entire nation, and then the government takes those funds, the Chinese government takes those funds, and they do massive subsidies to manufacturing in China. And those subsidies include grants, and they include below-market loans. So on top of the huge tariff on American products, and that basically stems from this currency manipulation, you have these huge subsidies to domestic manufacturers who export to the United States. Now, China is supposed to disclose those subsidies under WTO, but it may come as a surprise to some of this chamber, China doesn't do it. They only did it 1 year, in 2006. And so they are taking the structure that was set up and they're abusing it. And this adds on top of the currency manipulation, further driving jobs out of the United States, discriminating against U.S. products. Isn't there a time when we need, as policymakers in the nation, need to stand up for American workers, stand up for the American middle class, and say, we are not going to allow another nation in a major trading relationship to break the rules in order to discriminate against American products and put American workers out of work.
And from the work that Senator Schumer did early in this bill and the co-sponsorship of the senator from North Carolina who's presiding, this bill, it really is the first major bipartisan biggest jobs bill we've brought in front of this chamber. And this is a chance to finally begin to look towards ways of reindustrializing our country, of building manufacturing. It matters in places like Buffalo and Charlotte and Portland and Toledo. And this bill is a real opportunity. I think that's why we got 79 votes in the first go-around on Monday night. I think it's why we have so many Republican sponsors of this bill. It's why the work that Senator Schumer and Senator Graham have been doing for years to begin to build that foundation. And that's why this passage of 1619 is so important.
Well, Madam President, I just want to thank the senator from Ohio, Senator Brown, for his tremendous work on this, along with the work that my colleague from New York has done, Senator Schumer. It is time that we stand up for workers across our nation who have been systematically losing their good-paying manufacturing jobs because China has been pegging its currency to discriminate against American products and to subsidize the export of their own. This must be discussed in every corner of our nation. It must be discussed here on the floor of this chamber because it is affecting the success of American families in Oregon, in Ohio, in New York, in North Carolina, and throughout our nation. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Wyoming.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, if Washington is going to force new regulations on the job creators of this country, well, I think that America needs to know the cost of those regulations. That's why I rise today to discuss an important amendment, an amendment that I am offering to the underlying China currency bill. It is the Barrasso Amendment number 671. This amendment, which is a bipartisan amendment, it's co-sponsored by Senator Manchin and Senator Blunt, this will force the United States government to look before it leaps when it comes to issuing job-crushing regulations. Simply put, the administration would be required to do a comprehensive and transparent jobs impact analysis. A jobs impact analysis before issuing any job-crushing regulations. Job creation in this country has almost come to a halt. The Labor Department reported that 0 jobs were created in August. The economic recovery that was promised by the administration failed to materialize. Unemployment remains at 9.1%. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate in China is 4.1%. Our economy is stagnant. China's economy is growing. It has been this way since President Obama took office. Now, the President blames the American people by saying that the country has grown soft. In September, he stated in a TV interview in Florida that he said, the way I think about this is that, you know, this is a great, great country that has gotten a little soft, he said, and you know, we don't have that same competitive edge that we needed over the last couple of decades. He said, we need to get back on track. Well, yet despite the repeated assurances of improvement, President Obama's own economic policies have failed. The only people who have gained from these policies live in countries overseas. We see it in China, and these are people who are benefiting from American companies moving operations outside the United States. Why? Well, it's to escape Washington's red tape. The President's stimulus plan failed to produce the 3.5 million jobs that the President had promised. His so-called Green Jobs initiative gave us more red ink, but never came close to the 5 million new jobs that he predicted. All the while, the Washington bureaucracy that he controls has continued to churn out expensive as well as expansive new regulations that amount to an assault on domestic, private sector job creation. The facts are inescapable. Since President Obama took office, America has lost approximately 2.3 million jobs. We have been in an economic crisis, a crisis that extends to America's confidence in the President, confidence in this President to do anything that will change the current course. What the American people want is leadership. And they have rejected the President's insistence that the only way forward is through more spending and more Washington red tape on those in this country who create jobs. In September, the President addressed a joint session of Congress. He actually said he wanted to eliminate regulations. Regulations, he said, that put an unnecessary burden on businesses at a time, he said, when they can least afford it. Well, we heard this same message from the White House time and time again. The rhetoric coming out of this White House simply has not matched the reality. In fact, Washington continues to roll out red tape each and every day. The red tape makes it harder and more expensive for the private sector to create jobs, while making it easier to create jobs in foreign countries like China. The President said that his administration has identified over 500 reforms to our regulatory system, he said, that would save billions of dollars the next few years. Well, I appreciate that the White House may have identified wasteful regulations, but it won't really help our economy unless the White House repeals those wasteful regulations. The President's jobs plan does nothing to fix the regulatory burdens faced by America's job creators. His job plan actually adds to the burdens of job creators in this country. The President has tried to justify this increasing avalanche of red tape. He said he doesn't want to choose between jobs and safety. Well, in today's regulatory climate, the choice is a false one. Washington's wasteful regulations aren't keeping Americans safe from dangerous jobs. The American people cannot find jobs because no one is safe from the regulations coming out of Washington. For every step that our economy tries to take forward, Washington regulations continue to stand in the way. The expansion of the federal bureaucracy is suffocating the private sector economy. Federal agency funding has increased 16% over the past 3 years, while our economy has only grown 5% over the same 3 years. The regulatory burden is literally growing 3 times faster than our own economy. This massive increase in Washington's power has only made the U.S. economy worse, and China's better. Americans know that regulating our economy makes it harder and more expensive for the private sector to create jobs. The combined cost of new regulations being proposed by the Obama administration in July and August alone was $17.7 billion. Much of this cost was borne by Americans working in red, white, and blue jobs. Those who try to justify these policies claim that they will help us create green jobs at some unknown time in the future. Our economy, our job market, is not a seesaw. Pushing one part down doesn't make the other side pop up. This administration's out-of-control regulation scheme is dragging down large portions of our economy. Now, the President has promised to stop this kind of overreach. President Obama issued an executive order at the start of this year, way back in the beginning of 2011, and he said he wanted to do that to slow down Washington's regulation. Well, let's see. How effective has the President been with his executive order? Well, it's failed. In the month since the President issued his executive order, back way in the beginning of 2011, in all of those months, hundreds of new rules and regulations have been either enacted or proposed. For every day that goes by, America's job creators faced at least one new Washington rule to follow. When the President announced his executive order, he said he wanted to promote predictability and reduce uncertainty. These are very laudable goals. But a new rule every day does nothing to promote predictability and is the very definition of uncertainty. The main sources of uncertainty in the economy right now are Washington regulations. To make things worse, the people most victimized by this uncertainty are the very people that the President claims he wants to help. The President said last year that when it comes to job creation, he wants to, and he said, quote, start where most new jobs do, he said, with small businesses. Well, the sentiment is right. But again, what has he done about it? According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, businesses with fewer than 20 employees, well, those businesses incur regulatory costs that are 42% higher than larger businesses, which have up to 500 employees. And these figures don't include the avalanche of new regulations coming down the road. Since January 1st of this year, over 50,000 pages of regulations have been added to the Federal Register. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said that the President's new health care law alone will produce 30,000 pages of new health care regulations. And who are many of these aimed at? Well, it is these same small employers that the President claims to want to help. The President said he will keep trying every new idea that works, and he will listen to every good proposal, no matter which party, he said, comes up with it. Well, I have a pretty simple idea. If the President wants to know which proposals will work to create jobs, maybe he should require his regulatory agencies to tell him how their own actions will affect the job market. The amendment that I am offering is going to do just that, and it is a bipartisan amendment. It is based on a bill that I've introduced called the Employment Impact Act. This amendment will force every regulatory agency to prepare what is called a Jobs Impact Statement. A Jobs Impact Statement for every new rule proposed. The impact statement must include a detailed assessment of the jobs that would be lost or even gained or sent overseas upon enactment of a rule coming out of Washington. Agencies would be required to consider whether new rules would have a bad impact on our job market in general. This job impact statement would also require an analysis of any alternative plans that might actually be better for our economy. And the amendment requires regulatory agencies to examine and report on how new rules might interact with other proposals that are also coming down the road. The problem with Washington regulations is not only that they are too sweeping, but there are also too many. It makes no sense to look at any one individual rule or regulation in a vacuum. And enacting hundreds of them without identifying and understanding their cumulative impact and effect. The cumulative effect of these regulations is going to spell death by 1,000 cuts for hardworking Americans who are trying to work, trying to support their families. In keeping with the principles of transparency that President Obama regularly proclaims is a priority for him, this bill, this amendment, will require every jobs impact statement prepared by a federal agency to be made available to the public. The American people deserve to know, have a right to know, what their government is actually doing. And federal agencies in Washington need to learn to think about the American people before they act. Requiring statements from these agencies on what their regulations will do is nothing new. For 40 years, the federal government has required an analysis of how federal regulations will impact America's environment. They have to file things called environmental impact statements. And what I'm asking here is simply a jobs impact statement. Past generations of legislators rightly recognize the importance of America's land, air, and water. It is equally important that we recognize the importance of America's working families as well. America's greatest natural resource is the American people. We are talking about people who want to work, who are willing to work, who are looking for work, and yet cannot find a job. This amendment, the Barrasso Amendment, will force Washington bureaucrats to realize that Americans are much more interested in growing our nation's economy than they are in growing China's economy. I urge a vote and an adoption of this amendment. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Madam President. The Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to, first of all, congratulate all of my colleagues, 79 members that came together to vote to proceed to a very important measure, a jobs bill that is currently before us. The great news is it's a jobs bill that will cost us $0 to be able to implement in terms of about 2.25 million new jobs that will come. Why? Because we are saying, as a group, as the United States Senate, that enough is enough, and we want China, as well as other countries, to follow the rules. We want them to follow the rules so that when our companies and our workers are competing in a global economy, that we will have a level playing field, that we will have the ability to compete, because we know if the rules are fair, if there's a level playing field, we in America will compete and we will win. We know that. Now, the biggest violator on any number of trade issues we know right now is China. And since they joined the WTO 10 years ago, and the whole point of them being able to join the world community under a world set of economic agreements was to make sure that they would have to follow the rules like everybody else. But ever since that time, they have done nothing but flagrantly violate the rules. When China doesn't play by the rules, it costs us jobs. It puts our businesses in Michigan, our workers in Michigan and across the country at a severe disadvantage, and it's got to stop. Madam President, we in Michigan have been through more, deeper, longer than any other state in the Union. And we are coming back because of a great work ethic and ingenuity and ideas and entrepreneurship. And we are moving forward and creating new ideas, more clean energy patents being created in Michigan than in any other place in the country. We just had news today that, in fact, we are, last year, 2010, the fastest growing high-tech sector, more high-tech research and development jobs in Michigan than any other place in the country. And so we know how to compete and we know how to win. But we're in a global economy where our companies are competing against countries. And when we have an entity, a country like China, that does not feel that they need to follow the rules, whether it's stealing our patents, whether it's blocking our businesses from being able to bid to do business in China, or whether it's the huge issue of currency manipulation, which is in front of us today, we know that the rules matter. We know it's our job to stand up for American businesses and American workers. And that's what the bill in front of us does. It says to China and any other country involved in currency manipulation that we've had enough. It directs Treasury to take action, to look around the globe, determine where there is currency misalignment, to prioritize the countries that are most egregious in their actions. We know that China is at the top of that list. And then it requires them to act. It requires commerce to work with our businesses to act. We've had enough talk. We've had enough hearing about how give China time. We're now in past 10 years when they entered the WTO. And every time we start talking about this, they say, well, we're going to change it. We've started to change it. There are those economists who say that now has it not changed, but maybe it's even getting worse. Point is, we are losing jobs as a result of the fact that China cheats. And enough is enough. Well, how do they do that? Well, in this case, we say currency manipulation. I think a lot of folks' eyes glaze over. But the reality is, because of the way they value their currency, their money, they are able to get an artificial discount. Their products appear to cost less coming to the United States, same product, made the same way, and ours artificially gets an increase in the price. And it can be up to a 40% difference, just not because of anything other than the fact that they do not value their currency the way every other country does in the world economy. And so they always make sure that they peg it in a way that they get a discount, no matter what. And that's illegal under the WTO. It's unfair. It's cheating. And that's what this bill fixes. Real-world example. We have some great auto parts manufacturers in Michigan, and a very common story would be a part, brakes, or another part that costs $100 in Michigan, that the Chinese would be able to peg their cost at $60, not because there was any difference other than the fact that they value their currency in a way that allows them to have it appear that it costs less. And so this is something that we intend to take action on. But we know right now the good news is if China's currency was revalued, if they did what everybody else does in the global economy and followed the rules as they were supposed to, that we would see up to $286 billion added to our GDP right now. We would see 2.25 million U.S. jobs being created if China and those others around them followed the lead and, in fact, revalued their currency. 2.25 million jobs. We don't need a line item in the budget to do that. We're not talking about a new program. We're talking about simply leveling the playing field and stopping China from cheating. And we can create 2.25 million jobs. Our deficit would be reduced by between $621 and $857 billion at no cost to taxpayers. Now, at a time when we are struggling with the largest deficit hole we have ever had, and we are struggling with how we address that, the ability to have up to $857 billion reduced in our deficit at no cost to taxpayers, Madam President, sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And I would say people in Michigan would say, why has it taken so long to be able to address this? So now is the time. We have a strong bipartisan coalition. I'm so proud of all the colleagues that have come together from every part of the country, every part of our economy, whether it's manufacturing, agriculture, or textiles, or those involved in high tech, saying it's time for us to stand up for America, for American jobs, American businesses. That's what this is really all about. And what else are we hearing about this particular effort? The Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, said the Chinese currency policy is blocking what might be a more normal recovery process in the global economy. It is hurting the recovery. Again, something we can do that will reduce the deficit, create jobs. China proceeding with a policy that is hurting the recovery at a time when we need to get everything out of the way so that we can come roaring back as a country. We are the greatest country in the world. We have tremendous challenges right now economically that we will work our way out of. But one of the first things that we can do is to say to China, stop cheating. We also have heard Fred Bergson, the former Assistant Treasury Secretary, said, I regard China's currency policy as the most protectionist measure taken by any major country since World War II. Protectionist. We debate over the years, fair trade, free trade. Is it protectionist to stand up for American businesses or American workers? And here we have an expert saying to us that China's policy on currency manipulation he regards as the most protectionist measure taken by any major country since World War II. The reality is we can compete with anybody and win, and we will. But it's our job to make sure that there's a level playing field. This is about American competitiveness. This is about being in a global economy, making sure the rules are fair, making sure that everybody is following the same rules, and then let's go for it. And I'll put American ingenuity, entrepreneurship, research and development, skilled workforce up against anybody. Now, some say, in fact, we've heard now from the highest levels of the Chinese government that this will spark a trade war if we try to stand up for our businesses and require that there be a level playing field. We know we have a complicated relationship with China. Certainly, we borrow funds to offset our debt. But we also are the largest consumer market in the world. And they want to be able to sell to us. And I can't believe that they will decide they suddenly don't want to sell all of those things that they make to the United States, the largest consumer market in the world. The difference is they won't be able to cheat. They won't be able to get an artificial discount that will hurt an American small business making the same product. American textile industry. I had an opportunity to visit folks that make denim for denim jeans and visit folks in the cotton industry talking about competitiveness and what this policy, this protectionist policy in China is doing to the American textile industry, which is beginning to come back and will come back if, in fact, there's a level playing field on trade. But they are up against a situation where they artificially are facing a 28 to 30% discount because of currency manipulation. And yet they're still competing. Can you imagine if the rules were fair? This is about American competitiveness. It's about the fact that we are responsible for making sure there's a level playing field for American businesses and American workers. We will not have a middle class in this country if we don't make things and grow things. And we want to make things here and grow things here. The jobs will be here, and then we're happy to export them. We want to export our products, not our jobs. That's the difference. We're sick and tired of exporting our jobs because of the fact that China does not follow the rules. Enough is enough. More than 10 years they've had to step up and do what they're supposed to be doing under the agreements that they have entered. Enough is enough. So again, I'm looking forward to our final vote on this legislation. I think this is a very important moment at a time when there are many disagreements and there have been many difficult times here in the Senate being able to move forward and take action. The fact that colleagues on both sides of the aisle are standing together on behalf of businesses and workers through every corner of this country and saying we're going to fight for American jobs, American businesses, large and small, and we're going to make sure that we create a level playing field so we have the competitiveness structure that we need in this country, because we know if we have that level playing field, there's nothing that can stop American ingenuity and American workers, who are the best in the world and will continue to be. So I urge adoption of this bill and congratulate all of my colleagues. I'm pleased to have been involved with this issue for many, many years with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and very pleased that we've been able to get this legislation to this point. It's now time to act on behalf of American workers and American businesses. I yield back the floor.